Hello friends, today we will analyze one of the most tragic and at the same time one of the most instructive accidents in aviation history. On the night of December 22, 1999, a flight that lasted only 4 minutes cost the lives of 4 people and created a great awareness of spatial disorientation in the aviation world. The story of Korean Air Cargo Flight 8509 illustrates how even experienced pilots can be wrong and how deceptive human perception can be during night flights. At the center of the incident was a Boeing 747-2B5F cargo plane with tail number HL7451. This giant aircraft, imagine the length of a football field and the height of a 6-story building, was built in 1979 and had been in reliable service in the Korean Air Fleet for many years. The 747 freighter was one of the indispensable aircraft for cargo transportation around the world. The crew in the cockpit that night were highly experienced, but let's not just recognize them by numbers. Captain Kim Chang-kyu, 53 years, 13,490 total flight hours, 6,618 hours on the Boeing 747. He was in the last years of his career and was considering retirement to spend more time with his family. Second pilot song. Kyung-ho, 38, 4,310 total flight hours, 1,617 hours in a Boeing 747. He was a young and ambitious pilot, dreaming of a bright future at Korean Air. Flight engineer Nam Suk-woo, 51 years, 16,320 total flight hours, the most experienced of the 3. He knew the technical aspects of airplanes very well. Deadhead Captain Park Young-chul, 45 years old, traveling as a passenger. He was due to start another mission in Milan. These figures showed that the crew was highly experienced, but experience would not be enough to prevent what would happen that night, because the enemy they would face was not technical failure or weather conditions, but the human brain itself. KA 8509 was to operate a cargo flight from London Stansted Airport to Milan Malpensa Airport. The aircraft was carrying a total of 160 tons of cargo, mostly electronics and car parts. Planned route. After takeoff from Stansted, southeastward across the Channel via Dover, through France and Switzerland to Milan. Weather conditions that night were not difficult but cloudy. Visibility was limited, with clouds at a ceiling of 1,200 feet. Weather conditions in England on a typical December night. On December 22, 1999, at 18:22 GMT, KAL 8359 took off from Stansted's runway 5. Takeoff was normal, and the aircraft began to ascend rapidly. 18:22 and 35 seconds. Stansted Tower. Korean Air 8509. Contact Stansted Radar 121.2. 18:22 and 38 seconds. KAL 8509 121.2. Korean Air 8509. Good day. The aircraft made contact with Stansted radar and received routine guidance. Everything appeared to be normal. 8:23 and 11 seconds. Stansted radar, Korean Air 8509, turn right heading 95. 18:23 and 14 seconds. KAL 8509, right heading 95, Korean Air 8509. From this point on, however, things started to get complicated. Radar data showed that the aircraft was not exactly following the given course. This is where the critical point of our story begins. But meanwhile, a danger was growing in the cockpit that no one in the cockpit realized. What is spatial disorientation? Imagine, close your eyes and stop after being spun around in a swivel chair. That feeling of confusion. In the human brain, the balance organs in the inner ear, the eyes, and the position sensors in the body normally work together to perceive our position. But at night, in cloudy weather, when there are no visual references, this system can deceive us. Cockpit voice recorder recordings show that pilots experienced confusion about the state of the aircraft during this period, when the plane was flying slightly to the right, i.e. left wing up, right wing down. The pilots were trying to correct it, but were intervening in the wrong direction. "Captain, something's not right with the attitude indicator." Second pilot, "The attitude seems strange." So what would you do in this situation? Would you trust the instruments or your own feelings? The attitude indicator, the instrument that shows the position of the aircraft relative to the horizontal plane, was working correctly, but the pilots doubted it. This was the classic symptom of spatial disorientation. At around 18:25 and 20 seconds, the situation started to worsen. Imagine, a giant 160-ton plane slowly starts to tilt sideways, as if being pushed to the right by some invisible force. The pilots were making incorrect control inputs to correct this. Radar data shows that the plane was at this time at an altitude of 13,500 feet, about 4 kilometers high, at a speed of 300 knots, 550 kilometers per hour, at an increasing right bank angle, that is, with the right wing downward. Flight engineer, bank angle, bank angle. Banks warning that the plane was banked dangerously. What do you think the pilots failed to realize at this point? Here is the critical point. The pilots, thinking that the instruments were wrong, were making control inputs opposite to the real situation. The airplane was banked to the right, but they thought it was banked to the left. This was the most dangerous aspect of spatial disorientation. The pilots trusted their own misleading senses and did not trust the instruments that showed the exact facts. It was as if they were travelers lost in a maze, following the opposite compass. In 26 and 0 seconds, Stansted radar, Korean Air 8509, turn left heading 75. But it was too late. Imagine, the right wing of the 160-ton Boeing 747 is almost parallel to the ground, 80 degrees right bank angle. The nose of the airplane dives downward at a 50-degree angle, as if it had been shot with an arrow. What does this mean? When a normal airplane flies straight, its wings are completely horizontal. 0 degrees. 80 degrees means that the plane is almost completely on its side, cutting the air like a knife. "Captain, pull up, pull up," desperately trying to pull the plane up. VPWS, warning, terrain, terrain. The ground impact warning rings out. The last seconds were terrifying. The plane was descending at 200 feet per second, that is, the height of a 20-story building every second. Its speed had increased to 550 knots, 1,000 kilometers per hour, almost the speed of sound. In the cockpit, terrified pilots tugged at the control levers in a last-ditch effort, but the 160-ton behemoth was now hurtling toward the ground like an arrow. 18:26 and 5 seconds. Radar contact lost. KA-859 has crashed into farmland near Great Hallingbury in Essex. The impact was so violent that the plane completely disintegrated and spread for miles around. A huge fireball rose into the sky. All 4 crew members died instantly. Fortunately, the plane did not crash into a residential area, otherwise the casualties could have been much higher. The British Air Accidents Investigation Branch, AAIB, has launched a thorough investigation. Data from the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder confirmed a theory of spatial disorientation. Main findings: spatial disorientation, pilots lost visual references, and inner ear balance. gave misleading signals in cloudy weather. At night, distrust of instruments. Attitude indicator was working correctly, but pilots did not trust it. Incorrect control inputs. Control inputs were made contrary to the actual state of the airplane. Lack of communication. There was insufficient communication between the crew about the seriousness of the situation. Technical details. Aircraft was airborne for 4 minutes 43 seconds. Maximum bank angle, 90 degrees, fully inverted. Final altitude, 875 feet. Impact speed, 550 knots, 1000 km/h. Spatial distortion explanation. At this point, let us explain spatial disorientation in more detail, because this phenomenon is very important in aviation. Have you ever tried to find out which direction is north in the dark with your eyes closed after being rotated? Vestibular illusion. Semicircular canals in the inner ear detect rotational movements. Imagine spinning in a swivel chair for a long time and then stopping and feeling like you are still spinning. This is exactly what happens in pilots. Somatographic illusion. When you accelerate in a vehicle, you feel like you are being pushed backwards, right? Pilots feel the nose of the airplane lifting up during acceleration, even when flying straight. Graveyard spiral. This is the most dangerous one. When the airplane spins on the light bank for too long, the pilot thinks he is flying straight. When he gives a reverse bank too correct, the airplane starts to descend in a spiral, like water flowing into a sinkhole. What would you do in such a situation? Would you trust your own feelings or the instruments? This is exactly what happened in Call 8509. The pilots went into a graveyard spiral and couldn't get out. It was as if, in an invisible funnel, every move they thought was right was pulling them deeper and deeper. Lessons and precautions. 16:00, 17:30. After this accident, the aviation world learned important lessons. Training changes. Spatial disorientation training was increased. These scenarios were covered more frequently in simulator training. The principle of trust your instruments was emphasized. Technological development. Attitude indicators improved. Ground proximity warning systems strengthened. Enhanced GPWS systems deployed. Procedure changes. Improved procedures for suspected spatial disorientation. Increased crew resource management training. The Korean Air Cargo Flight 8509 accident showed how critical the human factor is in aviation. Even experienced pilots can suffer from spatial disorientation in the right circumstances. This tragedy cost the lives of 4 precious people, but the lessons it taught prevented thousands of future accidents. Today, pilots are much more aware, and modern airplanes have more advanced warning systems. Aviation is an industry that becomes safer by learning from mistakes. Every accident contains valuable lessons for future safety. Do you think this accident could have been prevented? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow our channel for more aviation accident analysis.